All right, welcome back. This is Truth Jihad Radio, right here at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. And I'm Kevin Barrett on the web at truthjihad.com. We're talking about political ponerology, which is the title of a book by a fellow named Lobosiski that came out in 2006, published by Red Pill Press. And I've got Harrison Koehli on the line. He is with Red Pill Press, and he's been studying this issue of ponerology, the science of psychopaths and power, the relationship between psychopaths and power, for a few years now. And as I was saying, I think this is one of the most important theoretical topics out there because it's got immense pragmatic and practical implications. Harrison, why don't you go ahead and pick up where you left off. Tell us about what you've been learning about this topic during the past few years.
All right. Well, I was talking about the kind of disconnect that people have about not being able to believe these sorts of things, and the fact that it kind of doesn't make sense because these things happen all the time. I think where the disconnect really is that people have a hard time believing that these kind of people attain positions of power. And if you look at situations in other countries, in totalitarian governments, it becomes pretty obvious that yes, they do. But if we look at a system like ours, do psychopaths rise to the top? Well, in looking at the literature, there isn't a whole lot on this topic in the actual psychological literature. After World War II, there were a bunch of psychologists and psychiatrists that talked about this. These were mainly the guys that were analyzing the Nazis that were on trial at Nuremberg. Among them, Gustav Gilbert, Leon Goldenson, David Kelly, and they, or most of them, Gilbert in particular, made the observation that psychopaths made a large percent, a significant portion of the top Nazi positions. The most notorious being Hermann Göring, whom Gilbert had the chance to interview and to meet with on a daily basis for about over a year before Göring committed suicide the day before he was scheduled to be hanged. Now, in the years since then, there hasn't been a lot that's been done. What we have seen in the last few years has been a book called Snakes in Suits by Robert Hare and Paul Babiak. Now, this book is about psychopaths in corporations, in business. And I think it's a really good book. It's really important for understanding the links because the corporate environment, the Wall Street environment, is very similar to the political environment, and the two overlap. If we look at a recent example like Bernie Madoff, I've read numerous articles on the internet with professionals, experts in the field of psychopathy, who speculate that Bernie Madoff perhaps is a psychopath. Now, they won't come out and diagnose him officially, but they can see the correlations. And I was actually at a conference, it happens every 2 years. It's the conference for the Society for the Scientific Study of Psychopathy. And at that conference, several of the speakers made the same point that Bernie Madoff does appear to be a psychopath. Now, if anyone's familiar with the story of Bernie Madoff.
The interesting thing about that,
keep going.
Harrison, let me just interrupt for a second, is in Snakes in Suits, Robert Hare says that psychopaths never last very long in power because they screw things up so badly. So his paradigm is somebody who rises rapidly in the business community. Everybody thinks, wow, this guy's so charismatic, and he's really, really hot. And then this person just screws everything up, doesn't do any of the detail work, takes everybody for a ride, and then blows up and gets caught, which is pretty much what happened to Madoff. But he suggests that the power elite is probably not full of psychopaths because the psychopaths are so incompetent, that is, they're unable to sustain their performance, and yet that's at odds with the view of ponerologists like yourself.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems that I've been looking at for the past couple of years. And what I've been able to find is that if you look at the actual case studies, that's where you need to go, because even in Snakes in Suits, Babiak, who was the first guy to really look at the issue, said that before he did his analysis, before he started seeing these things, the general consensus among experts was that you wouldn't find psychopaths at all in corporations for exactly that reason, that they're just too incompetent. They wouldn't manage, they wouldn't get past the screening process because they're impulsive, they're rude, they're bullying, all these things. What they found was the exact opposite, that these individuals passed with flying colors because they were so charismatic. And if you look at the case studies, like I said, of other governments, you'll see that people like these kind of people do manage somehow to keep their mask on for a significant period of time. And it seems to have something to do with, just as in the normal population, variations among the normal population, there are variations among psychopaths. So you get the less intelligent psychopaths and the more intelligent. You'll get the more impulsive and the less impulsive, and the more sadistic and the less sadistic. So you have this very small percentage of even psychopaths who are not only extremely intelligent, extremely sadistic, but also they have the self-control to be able to plan their crimes better than anyone else. Because and you find the same kind of dynamic in a common criticism of conspiracy theories, that with 9/11, for example, that it would have, if it was a conspiracy, it would have been revealed by now, because all conspiracies get revealed, and it's an illogical argument, because it presupposes that all conspiracies that have happened have been exposed by this point. It could be tomorrow.
It's tautological. It's a tautological argument. That is,
exactly.
It says that all conspiracies are exposed because all the ones that we know about have been exposed. Well, that's by definition, that's the ones we know about.
Exactly, and it's the same thing with psychopaths, because we only know about the ones that get caught, and we only know about, and those are the ones that become our case studies. If you look at Bernie Madoff was a successful businessman for 50 years, something like that. So what about all that time?
Right.
So you might be able to make the argument that eventually most of these people get caught, but that's something that really has to be dealt with in an empirical manner, and not just off the top of your head verbalistically.
Well, that's a really interesting connection, Harrison, between the so-called conspiracy theories and the idea that psychopaths are able to successfully get into power and stay in power. Because there are cases, similar to people like Madoff, who are psychopathic, perhaps, and stay in power for a long time and then flame out, years later. It takes, decades before they're caught. But likewise with things like, Operation Northwoods, this plan where top U.S. military brass, the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on the plan to set off bombs in American cities, killing civilians, sink American ships on the high seas, kill more civilians, stage a fake airliner shoot-down, a bit like some of what may have happened on 9/11, in order to create the illusion of a non-existent Cuban attack to justify an invasion of Cuba. So we know that the entire top level of U.S. military hierarchy was ready to murder hundreds of Americans to start a war with Cuba in 1962, and yet nobody knew about this until about 2001. So there again, the people who say, well, there couldn't be any conspiracies because they can't be kept secret. Well, you say, but that was kept secret for nearly 40 years. And then, of course, their response, if they're falling for this fallacy, is that, well, we finally found out about it, didn't we? It's maddening to try to argue with these people.
Mm-hmm. And
But you're suggesting that the easily discovered psychopaths are those who are unsuccessful, and the more successful ones are discovered much more slowly.
Exactly. And so the ones we have for study are the unsuccessful ones, which says something. And if you look at, we'll go back to the example of Beria, or we could use Göring and Hitler, because looking at the case studies, it appears that Göring and Martin Bormann were the most psychopathic. Now Gilbert, the psychiatrist, one of the psychiatrists that analyzed these people, he wrote a book called The Psychology of Dictatorship that was published in 1950. Unfortunately, it's out of print, so you can't really find it unless you go to a used bookstore or get it find it used online. But one of the things he points out that makes sense, and it accounts partially for the kind of argument that people make against the idea, is that even in the top clique, in the top Nazis, psychopaths were still outnumbered. He makes the point that perhaps Göring was the most psychopathic of the bunch, but Hitler and Stryker and Himmler and all these others were more paranoid or schizoid personalities, and that it's this combination of different kinds of types of individuals that really makes the network of the political. You could call it the new bourgeoisie, as Wojciechowski called it. So it's not just psychopaths, and that can partially account for the idea that maybe psychopaths wouldn't be so great in these positions, because where they do excel is manipulating from behind the scenes, and this is where Snakes and Suits is really important, because Babiak and Hare get into the techniques and the exact methods of manipulation that psychopaths use in a corporate environment.
It came out in 2006, published by Red Pill Press, and I've got Harrison Koehli on the line. He is with Red Pill Press, and he's been studying this issue of Ponerology, the science of psychopaths and power, the relationship between psychopaths and power, for a few years now.
All right. Well, I was talking about the kind of disconnect that people have about not being able to believe these sorts of things, and the fact that it kind of doesn't make sense because these things happen all the time. I think where the disconnect really is that people have a hard time believing that these kind of people...
As I was saying, I think this is one of the most important theoretical topics out there, because it's got immense pragmatic and practical implications. Harrison, why don't you go ahead and pick up where you left off? Tell us about what you've been learning about this topic during the past few years. All right, welcome back. This is Truth Jihad Radio, right here at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. And I'm Kevin Barrett on the web at TruthJihad.com. We're talking about political ponerology, which is the title of a book by a fellow named Lobosiewski.
Attain positions of power. And if you look at situations in other countries, in totalitarian governments, it becomes pretty obvious that yes, they do. But if we look at a system like ours, do psychopaths rise to the top? Well, in looking at the literature,